MX-6 is one of the few rare cars that we have nowadays that no one really knows about. This is something that's a bit special in the video today. We're going to be sharing it.
(1987) was the year the Ford Probe and the Mazda MX-6 were revealed to the public. A front-wheel drive coupe, you had the option of having a turbocharged 4-cylinder and a manual transmission. Ford Probe being the more performance-oriented coupe, while the MX-6 was the Grand Touring. Later down the line with the GD platform, that's when the 2.5 V6 were revealed for both coupes.
When Ford came out with the Probe back in the 80s, it was pretty much one of the most hated cars in the community because of the purpose that it was taking. It was supposed to replace the Mustang, a V6 front-wheel drive coupe replacing a rear-wheel drive V8. How can you replace something like that? And that's why the Ford Probe became such a massive problem. Granted, it wasn't a terrible car. I mean, the MX-6 is not a terrible car, but the thing is that they directed the car in such a horrible way, which is why it's so hated. And Mazda, given the fact that they have a lot less of a budget than Ford, they were not that really good with marketing. I mean, even when I was trying to look for commercials, when I was trying to look for forums and advertisements and stuff about the MX-6, there was hardly anything. The Ford Probe has so much more popularity on that than the MX-6. And yes, it's had a few good runs. It had multiple generations. So there was a point where the MX-6 was successful. But towards the end of it, 1997 was the last year, and it was also, funny enough, the first one to actually have OBD2. So, fun fact. So it really sucks just like seeing something like this that could actually be something enjoyable that unfortunately it wasn't. It was something that they flopped, and it should have been marketed something completely different. And we're gonna just explain a little bit on like the whole frame platform on both the Ford and the Mazda MX-6.
1987, that's when the MX-6 and the Ford Probe were revealed as the GD platform. This platform featured the turbocharged 4-cylinder as well as the option of a 5-speed manual. And they also featured some technology when it was involved with suspension, braking, as well as steering. There was actually some things that you can actually physically adjust in the Ford Probe for that. But with the Ford Probe, it was revealed that it was trying to replace the Mustang at the time. And that's what they were trying to do, especially given the fact of it was cheaper to manufacture. That fell short very quickly. And with the MX-6, on the other hand, the marketing wasn't as strong as the Ford Probe. And just a couple years later after that, the MX-5 Miata was revealed. And they only managed to make 2 generations, the second one being the GE platform. That featured the 2.5-liter V6, as well as still being front-wheel drive. And though they were both really good vehicles, the Probe had more of a hatchback style, while the MX-6 stayed traditionally as a coupe. They fell short right at the very end. 97 was the last year for both of these cars.
Sitting in the inside of the MX-6, I do apologize about the panoramic sunroof. I'm sorry, being open. Just given the fact of how dark it is, we had to make some circumstances. But anyways, talking about the inside of the interior of the MX-6, this is something that is just so old school, and it's just so nice to really just sit back and just have a nice refresh of the inside of one of these things. It reminds me a lot of the RX-7. It doesn't look exactly like an RX-7, but you can tell the inspiration is definitely coming from the RX-7. I mean, from the shape of the AC controls to the air vents itself to where the gauges point directly at you. And this is an option that the original owner actually made himself whenever he actually bought this car. But this wood trim right here just kind of shows the contrast of this interior. And that is something definitely that, you know, it's really cool in my opinion, honestly. So I really appreciate that a lot when it comes to this car. I think it's something really cool, honestly, and that's something that I really appreciate. And when it comes to the seats, they are actually really comfortable. They are leather seats. This is an LS, so this is the higher trim model of the MX-6. And surprisingly, for me being 6 feet tall, it's really comfortable. I'll be honest with you, it's extremely comfortable to actually sit in this seat. Same thing with the passenger, but the rear passenger seats, they're more so for storage, honestly. I wouldn't recommend doing anything when it comes to storage. But what I will say in terms of storage that is really, really good in this car is the trunk. This trunk is absolutely massive in the MX-6, and I was genuinely surprised by that. I mean, granted, this is a big coupe. This is a really, really long coupe. You know, it's narrow, so obviously you're very close to the passenger, you know, the literally way less than arm's length. And everything here is just on the controls for you too. And when it comes to the trunk, like I said, it's very spacious, and you do have access to the trunk. There's actually a little button release right on top of the seat where you just press and it comes right down. So sorry I slammed that. I know some people cringe. I just forced. It's fine though. But anyways, that's really how the interior feels. I mean, you have your old school AC controls where you have your complete manual buttons, and it just feels so good. Same things with these toggles here for the AC controls. You also do have your actual CD, which was an option, believe it or not, back in 1997. That's crazy to think about. And you also do have your cassette player with the radio, of course. This one I did have like a little cigarette lighter or Bluetooth thing because I like listening to my own music, so I left it here. You also have your 5-speed manual, and you also have your parking brake right here in the middle. What you do not notice though is cup holders. There's one singular cup holder in here, and that is all the way in the side here. That's it, just right below the AC vent. Not the best engineering in the planet, I'll be really honest with you, but just that's what Mazda thought of. So it was definitely a second thought. Cup holders were not that big of a deal back then like it is nowadays, so something that they didn't really consider back then. This was more of a car that was more for grand touring and enjoying the drive, enjoying the canyon driving, and enjoying the cruise, not necessarily for practicality. If you wanted practicality, then I mean, there's other options out there. There was a 626 back then. So there was a 333. That was a lot more of a practical car. The steering wheel itself, I love how there's a leather wrap steering wheel in here, and the 2 horns are going to be right here, placed here on the sides. So it's not necessarily just horns just in the middle, it's actually placed on the side. So it's an old school thing from the 90s. Same thing with your window controls. You have your window controls here on the side as well as your mirror controls. So it is electronically powered, and this car and in here it works. AC blows really cold. Same thing with cruise control. You also do have a whole button committed to activate cruise control. So it feels like a missile launcher, honestly. Same with your hazards, which is right next to it. And to set the speed that you want to be at your cruise control, just press set, good to go. And you also do have your dome lights here where you can dome it, your fog light controls, your heated rear window, which is surprising, I didn't know that. And you also have your glove compartment. Not the biggest space in the planet, but it'll do. After that, there's really no other type of storage in here. I mean, when it comes to the door panels, you have a little pocket right here where there's a bunch of Twix and stuff in here. And you have this little tiny pocket where you really just kind of use to close the door. On the other side, there is a little bit of difference because you actually have a actual jet fighter toggle to put your window up and down. And you also have your pocket here in the bottom, and that's pretty much it for storage. There's really nothing much else. This little center console thing here, it's tiny. It's not a practical car, honestly. Storage wise in the trunk, it's really good, but in terms of in here, it's really bad. But that's just something that you have to expect. I mean, when people bought the Miata, do you really think that they cared about storage? They used every ounce of it.
The Fox body Mustang was an absolute unit at the time, and everyone wanted to have a Fox body Mustang. I mean, you had the option of having a normal basic engine to having a turbocharged 4-cylinder while also having a 5-liter high output V8. It was impossible to replace a Mustang with a front-wheel drive coupe. And even though the Ford Pro was decent and it sold quite a bit, it fell short in the end whenever everyone preferred the Mustang over the Pro. That same thing fell off short for the MX-6. With the MX-6, however, it had a lot less marketing and it sold less than the Ford Pro, and everyone focused on having the Miata rather than the MX-6. And unfortunately, both the Mustang and to this day the Miata still continue on strong.
I love the engine sound of these MX-6, man. 2.5 liter V6 sounds absolutely glorious. Just get a little rev out of this thing. Absolutely freaking glorious engine. I absolutely love the sound of these things. And with the sound of this engine, there also comes a decent amount of power. I mean, back in 1997, there was only 164 horsepower out of this 2.5 liter V6. That's, I mean, nowadays embarrassing. I mean, granted, the ND2 Miata comes with 181 horsepower. This one comes with 164. That's literally almost the 20 horsepower difference. And this has 2 more cylinders. And it's about, you know, half a liter bigger, basically. So, but remember, this is from 1997. And also, small little disclaimer, this one is not stock by any means when it comes to the exhaust. The catalytic converter just recently blew out, so obviously it's going to sound a little bit raspy. Also, it does have a MagnaFlow muffler in it, and it also has a headers. It also has headers in here, so enjoying the sound is going to be one thing that I'm going to absolutely love.
So long story short, this is the KLDE 2.5 liter dual overhead cam V6. So it has 164 horsepower, 163 pound-feet of torque, accelerated 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds while having okay MBG. The Japanese one had more power.
We're gonna just do a little small acceleration. 0 to 60 is not crazy in these things. I hate the fact that there's a raspy noise in here. This was my personal car, so obviously I'm more used to the noise, and because of the fact that the cap blew out, doesn't make a satisfying noise as it used to. So literally just the other day it actually sounded really good. Now it just has a bit of a raspy noise in it. But driving the car now, the city position for me is phenomenal. But I will say this was engineered to be smaller than a 6-foot person. All right, so I sit slightly high in these things. This thing does actually have electric power seats that only recline, and only goes forward and backwards, and also it reclines up and down. I have it all the way to the lowest setting, and I still feel a little too tall in this car. It's not terrible, but it's also not the best entire seating position, but I've been through worse, so I'm not complaining about that. When it comes down to the blind spots around this car, it is so easy to check your blind spots around. Given the fact that this is from 1997, obviously the A pillars, B pillars, and even the C pillars in this car are very minimal. they're very small because they don't have the airbags and stuff, and obviously not as many sensors and stuff. So obviously the pillars are itself going to be a lot thinner, which makes it easier for you to see outside, and that also means the windows are bigger. So that is a big benefit of the MX-6. I just absolutely love that feature a lot. It's something that I really actually appreciate and miss compared to the majority of the other modern cars. I've driven a lot of modern cars already, obviously with Mazdas, and this is definitely something that I can appreciate. And obviously with the interior here, with all of the old school electronics, with the actual like old school looking AC unit, as well as a radio, as well as a cassette player, that's something that's very old. And it also has CD player as well too, so that's something that is just really nice to appreciate. Actually, this one doesn't have cassette player. It actually transferred to CD now, so that's interesting. Oh no, it does have a cassette player. Never mind. It does have a cassette player as well as CD, which was an option back then, so that is something very interesting. And when it comes to the miles per gallon, of course, in the MX-6, this one is not the greatest in gas, given the fact that the cap blew out recently. So I average at least about between maybe 15-16 miles a gallon on the highway, which is really bad. And also given the fact that this also has short gear ratios, it revs very happy at 4,000 RPM when you're going between around 70 to 80 miles an hour. So your gas mileage is not going to be entirely the best, but on the EPA and what they said in the ratings on Google, you could get close to 30 miles a gallon. Mostly people average at least between like 20 to 25 miles a gallon on the highway and around 20 in the city, which is not terrible. This one is definitely not getting that gas mileage though. I can 100% say that. With the transmission too, like I was mentioning with the short gears, it reminds me a lot of the Miata short gears, and that's also mainly because of the fact that it doesn't have overdrive. So with that being said, it's a 5-speed manual with short gears, meaning it's going to be rev happy all the time, and this thing revs all the way up to 7,000 RPM. There are rumors though that it can rev up to 8,000 RPM after tuning, of course, and it sounds absolutely stupidly glorious after that. And one thing that I can appreciate too is the steering. I love the steering in this thing. It's a hydraulic type of steering, so you feel everything on the road. And this one does have lower suspension, so like everything is slightly more sensitive in it. And like driving this thing is just such a pure driving experience that it's like you don't really experience anymore. I honestly feel so much more communication with this car than I have in an ND2 Miata, obviously, and that has to do with the electric power steering that the Miata has that this one, of course, it doesn't have at all. So this one is just pure like driving experience. It's similar to like what the older Miatas feel like. I'm gonna just let this ambulance pass by as it is a bit obnoxious. All right, as it passes by now I can at least speak a little bit now. What else is there really to talk about this car? I mean, we've already covered the interior. We've already covered like majority of the history of this car, and let's talk about a little bit of the sentimental, at least part about it, and semi-personal about this car. That's why I love it, and I hate the fact that I have it for sale. But this was pretty much my dad's car. He didn't have this MX-6, this exact one. This one has a cool story behind it, but he had the Ford Probe GT back then. And something that he wanted to find was at least something that was exactly the same as a Ford Probe. Just like we talked about, they're both identical vehicles. And with that being said, it's something that is, whenever he found this car and whenever we started working on it a little bit, and I started, you know, tinkering with it a little bit too, it was definitely some sentimental value that I had with this car that I know I'm never gonna forget. And I really, really appreciate this car. I'm selling it to a friend who is still very close to me and stuff, so I'm at least still able to see it, and I'm at least able to still appreciate the car while it's there. You know, I mean, the story behind this car, whatever, ever since I've owned it, had a lot of overheating problems. The MX-6 are very prone to overheat quite a bit, something in the forums that I've been saying a lot about, and this one notoriously was overheating a lot. So I had to replace the cooling fan, I had to replace the whole radiator, and I did a coolant flush, also replacing the hoses as well. So the only thing I have not replaced was the thermostat, which I should have, but I bought the wrong thermostat and I've never replaced it since. It's very easy to access though. Other things that I've replaced in this car, it has brand new brakes, disc and pads. It also has lowering suspension, so the suspension is relatively new, so the rust from the components and the suspension and stuff is mostly gone. The calipers are still the original calipers, so there's still a little bit of rust there. but there's also a bunch of new gaskets and everything too, and hoses that we had to replace as well, because this car was running absolutely terrible at some point whenever I was putting the headers in myself, and that was an absolute nightmare whenever I had to do that. But this car is definitely a journey, and right now as it sits, it's the best run it's ran ever since I've had the car. And I hate the fact that now it decides to run at the absolute like peak of its performance, and just the noise. You have to appreciate that so much. This 2.5 liter V6 is just such a unicorn for the MX-6, and this is not even the smallest V6 that Mazda has sold in history. They sold one that was less than 2 liters. It was a 1.9 or 1.8 liter V6 from the MX-3, which are even rarer than the MX-6. And God, man, it's just such a fun car to drive. I mean, it's not as great handling. It's more of a GT car. The style, you can tell right off the bat, is more of a GT car, but it always puts a smile in my face every time I drive this car. I never have a problem driving this car. And surprisingly, even with the problems that I've had with it, it's never actually left me stranded, surprisingly. Even when it was overheating, it survived home. It survived home. When I had a bad cam, it still survived and started up every day. So this engine is a beast. I can definitely say that. This engine is an absolute beast when it wants to work, and it just gives you so much joy. And this is such an easy car to learn how to drive stick if you manage to find one, or if you have the privilege of driving one of these things. As a first car for me, I wouldn't recommend an MX-6, just for the simple reason that parts are very difficult to find on this car. But as a project car, this is something definitely to appreciate. Not many people know about this car nowadays, and it's really unfortunate. And now, since I had the privilege of actually owning one, I can definitely say I had something that was a unicorn to me, and it was some type of sentimental value. And this is before whenever I decided to get into rotors. So yes, I am a big Mazda guy, and I know I post a lot about Mazdas. I know you see a lot of Mazda videos. I promise there's going to be a lot more different content. Of course, there's a lot going to be different content, but this one was definitely something that I really wanted to make as good as possible. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This one took quite a bit of work, and I had to do like different time zones and everything. And obviously I'm driving at night, so it's not the best quality when it comes to night drives. Granted, especially since it's coming off of an iPhone. But I wish the MX-6 was just genuinely more appreciative, man.
The MX-6 is just an absolute unicorn of a car that no one really knows about. In fact, maybe just only a handful of people know about it, and maybe some know that it existed. Of course, the Miata has sold over 1 million units already, and they're absolutely everywhere, where they have a lot of aftermarket support. You could put a V8 in it, you could put a turbocharger in it, you could put whatever you want in those things. The MX-6, however, on the other hand, it's not as much aftermarket support. I've seen people put turbochargers in it. I've seen people do some crazy stuff with them, but it's rare to see something like that nowadays. And that's why if you find one, you should definitely buy one. Of course, if you find a mint condition one, definitely buy one, because these things do have a lot of potential to actually be just an absolute ride of a toy. And I've seen people put some real crazy things in these things, where they can even beat an own Mustang, just depending on what you do with them. The KLDE engine has a lot of potential, and there's been chances where you could put even over 200 horsepower on these things, and no one really understands that. I mean, some people even put that engine in a Miata, for its sakes. And for me, I'd say if an MX-6 ever pops up, definitely buy one. It's something that you'll never forget, and the experience you're gonna have with one, you'll never ever forget it. Until next time.